There is no word in the Bible for religion. It's kind of weird. There's no word in Hebrew for religion. We had to borrow a word from other faiths called dat. There's no word in the Bible for religion because the Bible never imagined religion as a separate domain of life. We think of religion as a domain of life. We think that life is sort of split up the way that the sections of the newspaper appear. There's politics, there's business, there's sports, there's the arts, there's weather, and then there's religion. Or if you go to college, you take political science, economics, psychology, sociology, and then if you have an extra unit or two, you can take a class in religious studies. The Bible never imagined that the world was split up that way. For the Bible, everything is like one. People, human beings. In fact, in life, we know this. You go to college and you study political science or economics, but you soon understand that they're very connected to each other. More than just the domains of a newspaper, we have adopted a Christian idea that body and soul are split. And that therefore, there are matters spiritual and matters material. And spirituality should not get polluted by being in touch with materiality. And materiality can exist in a domain separate from matters of spirituality. These things are separate. That something is unholy about matters material when you're dealing with matters of the spirit. And in America, what we did is we turned that into an ideology and said that spirituality is private and materiality is public. So we keep our religions to ourselves and we don't spread them to the outside world. And that's our basic idea. I remember when I was a graduate student, I took a class in world religious education, and one of the guest speakers, the guest lecturers, was a very, very famous missionary, a fellow who had grown up in Asia, converted to Christianity, was teaching in major universities all over the world, and he came to speak to our class. It was a seminar, and I was the only Jewish person, I was the only rabbi in the class, and he said to us, this very sweet man, very, very deep and wise man, he said, listen, I was raised Buddhist, I understand Buddhism. And I converted to become a Christian. I understand Christianity. And I have studied Islam and lived in Saudi Arabia. I understand Islam. And I've lived in India. I understand Hindu and Indian religions. He looked at me and he said, you, I don't understand. I said, good, me neither. He said, no, seriously. He said, I opened your holy book. I opened the Talmud. What do you read when you first open the Talmud? You read Bava Metzia chapter 1. Goes like this, Shnai Mochzim B'talis. Two guys walk into the court, each holding one end of a shirt. One guy said, it's mine, I found it. The other guy said, no, it's mine, I found it. This guy said, I own it. The other guy said, I own it. The question is, what do you do? He said, I don't understand your spirituality. What is the spirituality of a shirt? And he's exactly right. Because the Jewish tradition began with a very different idea. There is no split between materiality and spirituality. This book of Leviticus that we've been reading for these last weeks has a very simple idea. What kind of world would you have to build for God to be your neighbor? What kind of city would you build for God to move in? What place would God like to live? It's a question of materiality, spirituality, all mixed up into one. That question, by the way, of the two guys in the shirt is very simple. It's the simplest question of all. How do you have spirituality if human beings are in conflict? How do you settle conflict so that we can see the humanity in each other? What procedure, what structure, framework, what frame of mind do you have to teach human beings in order to put down their rivalries and see the precious divinity within each one? It isn't a shirt we're dividing. It could be a country, for example. Could be a world. How do you solve basic human problems in order to bring the divinity that is inherent in the world to shine. If you think that spirituality must be kept hermetically sealed from materiality, you're going to find this week's reading in the Torah very, very troubling, because it's about money. Because money has an important impact on the way we live in this world. And the Bible is concerned. And the Bible is concerned about two effects of money on human beings. The first effect is poverty. What happens in an economic system when you have vast differences of economic wealth? When you have people who are very, very, very wealthy and people who have nothing. What do you do about that? Is that a spiritual problem? Can you pray? Can you believe in God? Can you observe commandments? Can you observe religious custom knowing that there are 61,000 people who live on the streets of this city? Does it disturb your prayers? Does it have anything to do with your spirituality? Bible says God isn't going to live in a city with 61,000 homeless people. You better do something about it. And the first thing is, before you say, well, we don't have a solution, these are very complicated, we've raised taxes, we've paid. Yes, I know that. But first, acknowledge the problem. And acknowledge it as a religious problem. And the second problem the Bible is worried about is the problem of wealth. What happens when people accumulate enormous amounts of wealth? What does that do to them? Well, how does that affect our human relationships? How does it affect the way that we see each other? And this week's Torah portion, the one that Ashley is about to read for us, is going to try to deal with those two questions. Now, you have to know something about these guys. The people who wrote this text were the priests of ancient Israel. The priests of ancient Israel were the only tribe in ancient Israel that didn't own any property. There were 12 tribes. The other 11 tribes each have property. They own a section of the country. People lived on farms. They had homes. They lived in cities. They had apartments. People lived, but the priests had nothing. So the priests are living this propertyless life, looking into the property life of other people. And they come up with a solution. And the solution is very strange, but I want you to hear it, because I think there's a sort of poetry in it. It's not practical, but it's poetic. Two solutions. Number one, 6 years you farm your fields, 6 years you conduct your business, 6 years you engage in the economy. On the 7th year, you stop. How's that? On the 7th year, you put down the economy. On the 7th year, you stop being an economic human being. You don't buy, you don't sell, you don't acquire, you don't invest. You just live off the land. This is a remarkable thing. For 6 years, you have employees. For 6 years, your employees farm your land. For 6 years, they clean your house. For 6 years, they paint your fence. On the 7th year, everyone's equal. Wouldn't it be great? The 7th year, Jeff Bezos' chauffeur hands him the keys and says, drive yourself. On the 7th year, everyone becomes an equal. So that nobody's wealth becomes their prerogative and their privilege. You understand that wealth is a social construct, but it doesn't affect your sense of who you are as a child of God. Is it practical? No, it's ridiculous. Is it wonderful? Oh my gosh, yes. And here's the second one. You then count off 7 cycles of 7 years. You get 49 years. Right. And then there's one more year called the 50th year, and that's called the Yovel. Yovel is the Jubilee. Jubilee, the word Jubilee actually means Yovel. And on that year, something remarkable happens. Don't raise your hand, but how many of us have ever played Monopoly? Okay, how many of you ever beat your little brother in Monopoly? How many of you ever sent your little brother crying to, I did that. So you know how, so the question is, you play Monopoly, and if you really love your brother, here's what you do. You play for an hour, and at the end of the hour, you know what you say? We're going to stop now, and we're going to push all the money, all the hotels, all the houses, all the properties back into the middle of the board and start over again. Everybody starts with $200 on Baltic Avenue and the shoe. I was the shoe, right? If you know Monopoly, you know what that meant. That's what they want us to do. Now just imagine this idea. For 49 years, you can make all the money you want. On the 50th year, everybody moves back to Reseda. On the 50th year, everybody goes back to their ancestral home. All the bank accounts are zeroed out. All the investment accounts are zeroed out. Nobody drives a Rolls Royce. Nobody has a bicycle. Everybody gets a Toyota Corolla. Everyone goes back to equal. And we rewind the economy to year one. Is it practical? Absolutely not. But it reflects two realities. Number one, the unholy horror of poverty. What the Bible is terrified of is systemic poverty. Poverty that goes on one generation, and 2 generations, and 3 generations, and then people start to think of themselves as hopeless. They'll never get out of poverty because they don't have any image of what they can become. And second, the unholy horror of the prerogatives of wealth, of people who have so much wealth that they think that the rules don't apply to them, that they don't have to watch out for the other, that they're not responsible for each other, that the state of the society, the state of the world, and the state of the people who work for them are not their problem anymore. They live on a different planet. The Torah is so horrified by those two realities that it offers us a totally unpractical but beautifully poetic solution. But what it asks us most of all is to say, what does your money or your lack of it do to you? Does it destroy the God that lives within? And does it blind you to the God who lives within the other? That's the Torah that Ashley is about to read. Page 738, we ask for the first aliyah.